So we started the recording now, a bit late, but anyway, now we started it, and we will be sharing a link to the recorded webinar with all who have signed up for this webinar later on. We will also try to answer questions, as I said, as we present. If there are questions we are unable to answer at this webinar, we might submit answers if possible in a follow-up email, which everyone will receive, together with the link to the recording and also the presentation. Before we kick off, I would like to just say a few words about who we are, who is Preferred by Nature, because many of you might not know us already. We are an international non-profit organization who have been working for more than 25 years with the sustainable land use practices and especially forest management practices. We are more than 300 people working in more than 100 countries around the world, and we work with several different certification programs. These programs are all addressing sustainability issues related to the agriculture and forest sector, and we are working with some of these schemes that you're already probably familiar with. On the top, FSC, PFC, SPP, and also recently we were accredited to offer SURE certification. From a historical background, we have been very active in the forest sector, and we have, over the past years, certified more than 80 million hectares of forest around the world. There's a slide, Andre briefly presenting some data, and we have good colleagues who are engaging on a daily basis with the forest sector and with the activities, and also stakeholders involved in the sustainable forest management in more than 40 countries. We have been working over the past 10 years or so increasingly with the biomass sector, and we've been working with SPP certification since it was launched quite many years ago, and also have I think close to 100 SPP certificate holders in our client portfolio today. As I mentioned, we also recently started working with SURE, and we're accredited to work with the SURE scheme. We have also, I would like to say, we've been working a lot, as I just mentioned, with the supply chain, the forest sector, the biomass producers, but we are also managing an energy producer verification program, which we have been working with, especially in Denmark, based on a Danish industry agreement, and also recently the Danish REDII legislation, which require energy producers in Denmark to declare and submit verified data to the authorities, which we as a verification body and certification body are verifying for approximately 80 or 90 energy producers in Denmark. This is just to say that in some countries, and I think Andre will get back to that, the REDII requirements are already implemented in a way which require energy producers to declare and provide assurance of biomass meeting the REDII or the national REDII legislation. So with that, the brief introduction to who we are. I also want to mention that we are running a training program and also regular webinars, so you are free to follow our webinars and our trainings on our website. We publish information about these also in our newsletter, which you're most welcome to sign up to on our website. And one webinar we will be running in a few weeks is about the recently launched or the coming EU deforestation regulation. So we just wanted to mention that here, in case this is relevant to any of you on this meeting, that you are free to sign up for this webinar about this quite revolutionary new legislation that will come into play in the EU during 2024. So with that, I think we would like to also hear a little bit about you. We have a quite large audience, so we cannot make individual introductions, but we would like to run a very quick poll where you are able to present which, or indicate which type of organization you're representing. So hopefully, if we launch it now, Andre, it should be possible for you all to indicate that in the poll, so we have an idea about who are on this meeting, and also which type of organization you are representing here. So has it been launched?
Yes.
We hopefully you will be able to see and also answer the poll.
Mm-hmm. Oh. So.
And I don't know, Andre, do you get any results?
Yes, I think so. I hope you can see it. So hello from my side. So yeah, just to show a bit like who we are here. So it's we have more or less a quarter of people from biomass producer side and quarter of people from energy producer side, and then we have some representative of certification schemes, and then also quite some people from other entities. So yeah, it's quite a nice split between different organizations. So yeah, it seems like a good way of doing it. So also I will then start with the technical part of the presentation. It's a bit of the agenda here. So we will be looking a bit on the background of the REDII. Then we will elaborate about the options for showing the compliance with REDII. And then we will dive more into the two voluntary schemes which are currently approved for forest biomass. And then the second half of the webinar will be more focusing on the details of the REDII in terms of the specific requirements as harvesting criteria, LULUCF criteria, or greenhouse gas savings. And at the end, we will have the session for the questions and answers. So don't hesitate to put the questions to the chat as we go, but also there will be some time at the end of the webinar for asking questions. I have to say at the beginning that there is still quite many unclear issues around REDII, so we might not be able to provide the answer directly, but we will try to find out, and if we don't have the answer right away, then we would come back to you with the answer. So let's start. Well, a bit of the background of Renewable Energy Directive. So there was first Renewable Energy Directive in 2009, which was covering the biofuels, so the fuels used for transportation. And in 2018, European Commission has updated this directive to cover also solid biomass and biogas, and have a regulation framework for this as well. So for who this directive is applicable, it is for any liquid biofuels, it is for solid biomass used in the installation above 20 megawatt of capacity, and it is for biogas installations above half megawatt of capacity. And there is also recently at the ETS scheme. So if within the ETS scheme, the entity is using biomass, then the biomass should be also REDII compliant. Also, probably good to mention that while REDII is covering all the European member states, there is already some kind of legislation in some other countries like Denmark, UK, Netherlands, or Belgium, which goes beyond the requirements of RED II. So there are some additional requirements on forest protection or social requirements. There are also some requirements on the secondary feedstock, which is not the case for the RED II. There are some specific requirements on woody biomass coming from non-forest origin. Also, there is different feedstock classification in such legislation, so there are some cascading principles. However, we will not be talking about these, so today we will very much focus on the RED II and how the RED II shall be implemented, and what you as biomass producer, end user, or trader with biomass could do in terms of meeting the RED II requirements. So we will not be looking into these additional requirements. How the RED II is structured. So European Commission has drawn the sustainability and greenhouse gas saving criteria, and these can be met by two options, either through the voluntary schemes or through national verification schemes. In both cases, there should be a verification done by certification bodies, which are either accredited to the voluntary scheme or to the national scheme. That can differ a bit, and the RED II applies on both agriculture biomass and forest biomass. In this webinar, we will be very much focusing on the forest biomass, as the agriculture biomass goes a bit beyond this focus. So as mentioned, there are the two options, either the voluntary scheme, which shall be recognized by European Commission, or by national schemes, and the national schemes can be either recognized by the European Commission, or it can be a national scheme which complies with the local legislation, and therefore it does not need to be recognized by the European Commission. There are obviously some advantages and disadvantages coming from this. For the voluntary scheme, then the obvious advantage is that the scheme would then be automatically accepted in the cross-border trades. It is a scheme which is approved by European Commission, which provides some additional advantage in terms of security, that won't be changed. The procedures are harmonized, and it's quite easy to change whenever there are some changes. Then the voluntary scheme can be quite flexible on that. And there are obviously some disadvantages coming from the voluntary schemes as well, which is that not all voluntary schemes are recognized for all scopes. There are a number of schemes which might not be always compatible, so it might be difficult to work with a number of schemes, or some operators might need double certification and so on, and there are probably connected with higher costs, as the schemes usually charge some fees from the biomass traded with the claim. So we could say that the costs will be a bit higher. On the other hand, you could also decide to go with the national scheme, and if you would opt for a national scheme which is approved by European or recognized by the European Commission, then such national scheme would still allow the cross-border trade. The procedures would be still harmonized, and there would be the official approval through the Commission. So that means that that claim should be acceptable in different countries. But the issue there might be that it's not that flexible in terms of the changes, because whenever you would like to adapt the national scheme, it would probably need some kind of change in the legislation, which is not always easy to be done. Again, like it might not cover all biomass fuels, and the issue is that this process is not that simple, and therefore there is only one such scheme recognized by European Commission, and that's the scheme in Austria. So no other national schemes are being recognized at the moment on the European level. And finally, there is the third option, which is national scheme, which is not recognized by European Commission, but it's a scheme which is working in a specific country. When it comes to the cross-border trade, that would not be possible. So if you would have the biomass certified against the national scheme, you could not simply trade the biomass within the European Union, but you would need to have certain bilateral agreements between different countries, and like all the countries would need that agreement. So any new country would still need to sign a specific agreement, which makes it a bit problematic. Although it would probably be a cheaper option, because the national schemes usually don't have the fees. The disadvantage would also be that it would not be recognized automatically by, like, the voluntary schemes would not be compatible with this, so you cannot send the claim from the national scheme to the biomass producers or end users who are certified with the voluntary schemes. But it would be quite workable solution for the domestic market and the biomass which is used in the local market. Again, it would not be very flexible for revision, because there would require changes in the legislation, and it might again not cover all the biomass fuels. So, but these are the three options how to go around the REDII and how to implement that. And I will not be much speaking about the national schemes, as this is very specific for specific countries, but I will be looking into the recognized voluntary schemes. So there is number of schemes already recognized, but most of them are actually recognized for the agriculture feedstock and usually used for the biofuels. And for the woody biomass, there are currently two schemes recognized, which is SURE. SURE is recognized for both agriculture and forest biomass. And then there is SBP, which is recognized for the woody biomass, either coming from forest or non-forest origin. But SBP is not a recognized scheme for agriculture biomass. Additionally, there are some other schemes in the approval process. So there is US Soybean Sustainability Assurance Protocol and KZR, which are already further in the process. So they do have the positive technical assessment done, and there are further in the approval process. And then there is also other schemes, like, for example, PFC, which are being in the approval process, but not yet being recognized. So that's the current situation with the voluntary schemes, and therefore I will be focusing on the ones which are already recognized, which is SURE and SBP. Both of these schemes are having some kind of differences, which I will try to elaborate on right now. So I will start with SBP. SBP was or is here already since 2013, and it's not specific scheme for REDII compliance, but SBP has a REDII compliant module for REDII compliance. The biomass which is coming with the SBP claim is not only REDII compliant, but it must be also at the same time either SBP controlled or compliant. So there might be some additional requirements on that biomass. On the other hand, such biomass would be also accepted on the markets which are having these additional requirements. So that brings a bit advantage there. It's also the certification starts with the biomass producer. I will be speaking about it a bit later, but that's probably very important difference between SURE and SBP. Currently, there is limited number of risk assessments, and therefore the level B assurance would need to be used. I will also be speaking about it later. And also the difference is that the residues need to be at least SBP controlled, which is not the requirement of REDII. On the other hand, SURE, it's a specific scheme developed for REDII compliance, so there are no additional requirements. It is accepted in the countries where the legislation is at the level of REDII and does not have any additional requirements. All economic operators in the supply chain need to be certified. They share the same issue with the limited number of risk assessments which can be used. So that's pretty much similar. And for SBP, the certificate is issued for 5 years, while in SURE it is only 1 year. Now I will speak about how the two schemes are actually implemented and what is the difference there. So I will start with the example of pellets. So in case,
Andre?
Yes.
I think there's a question here relating to the previous slide. What does it mean that it's not recognized by EC national schemes may accept not recognized voluntary scheme? What voluntary schemes are considered? Do you understand that question? Can you see it in the chat?
No, I don't see the questions, unfortunately. Let me see.
I think it's about what it means that when a scheme is not recognized.
Okay, the national scheme. Now I got it. Okay,
yeah, I think that one.
Yeah. This question. Okay, so so it starts that there is a REDII, and the REDII need to be transferred to the national legislation of each member state, and then the member states can decide how they will actually implement the regulation, and the member states can say either we will go just with the voluntary schemes or we will develop our national scheme. And then if the second is the case, then the national scheme can be either specific for the country and they don't send it to the European Commission for an approval, and then it will work within the specific country, or they can take the additional step and take the national scheme and send it to the European Commission for further approval. And that's like an additional step of the approval. And whenever the national scheme gets that, then that would automatically be accepted in different countries. So we could see this happening with the RED I for the biofuels, that some member states has developed their national schemes, and at some point of time they have submitted that national scheme to the European Commission, and whenever they fulfilled the requirements of the Article 30.6, then there would be recognized, and such claim would be accepted in all the member states. I don't know. I hope that provides the answer to the question, but let me know if it's still unclear.
Yeah, if there's follow-up question, we can take that later. There was also a comment that the Austrian scheme probably only cover agricultural biomass, but I think you also confirmed that.
Yeah.
But thanks.
Great. So, and for then the difference within how the schemes are implemented is that while SURE does require that every economic operator in the supply chain is certified, so basically it does require that like any trader further in the supply chain gets the SURE certificate and pass the claim along the supply chain. In SBP, there is the option that there is the pellet mill is holding the certificate, and then the certificate covers the whole supply chain back to the forest. So what does it mean is that I would say this is probably a bit of an advantage for SBP, for the pellets, where you can have one certificate and it covers within this certificate the whole supply chain, where in the SURE scheme you would need to go back and ask the suppliers to get certified and pass the claim there. For chips, it would be similar situation. So you would have a chip producer who would be certified, and then passing the claim up to the energy producer. But there is also the option that the energy producer under the SBP scheme would be holding the certificate as biomass producer. So basically there would be one certificate for the energy producer, or one certificate which would be the biomass producer and the energy producer at the same time. And they, like with that certificate, they could cover the whole supply chain. While in SURE, there would be the need to certify all the suppliers back to the first collecting point. So that's I think one of the major differences between the schemes. Are there any questions to this?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
I will let you know if the questions come up, Andre.
Now I see there is one question. Can SURE scheme be also applied for palm oil? Yes, I mean, of course, SURE is also covering the agriculture biomass, so SURE could be could certify or like covering also palm oil industry as well. So
yeah, and then there's the question whether the recording from this meeting will be made available. Yes, as we mentioned in the beginning, we recorded and we'll share the recording.
Good. So let's dive a bit more into the RED directive. So RED has kind of three pillars. So there is harvesting criteria, so the land use criteria. Then there is the land use and land use change and forestry criteria. And the third pillar is the greenhouse gas saving criteria. So these are the three core elements of RED II. And before I start speaking about these, I think it is very important to speak about the risk assessments and how actually the requirements should be implemented. And this is one of the most important thing to understand whenever you want to implement the RED II. that there is something called evidence A and evidence B. Both of them are risk-based systems, but evidence A, it's a risk assessment on the country level. So whenever that would be available, the biomass producer could take this risk assessment and use it in the system, which of course facilitate the work a lot. And it is basically looking into the existing legislation and how the legislation is enforced in the specific country. So you would be looking at the country as a whole. Such risk assessment cannot be produced by the biomass producer, but it must be produced by some third party. It's a bit unclear like who this third party can be. And there are different approaches in different countries. So for just few examples, so for example, in Germany, SURE scheme has produced risk assessment, which is considered to be evidence A risk assessment. In Sweden, there is one risk assessment produced by the authorities. In Denmark, there is SBP risk assessment, which is used for the local requirements. And in Poland, as I understand, currently there is the use of evidence B, for example. So definitely, the easiest option is if there exists such evidence A risk assessment, because then any economic operator can take this risk assessment and use it. Whenever there is not such risk assessment, that would mean that a biomass producer needs to develop their own risk assessment, which would be specific for the sourcing level. So you can, and what does it mean? I mean, the issue is that if you are using the evidence B, then you cannot just produce a risk assessment saying that there is a legislation in specific country and there is evidence that the legislation is enforced, because you need to go down to the sourcing level. So in fact, you would need to refer to some best management practices and use this as the evidence for the REDII compliance, which makes the situation a bit more complex. And then I would say very important is like what could be the role of FSC or PFC in it. Like that, I could imagine that FSC or PFC could be used as the evidence B in case the biomass would be certified, because then there would be some best management practices on that biomass already implemented. So to sum up the risk assessments and how that's done. So for evidence A risk assessment, it must be produced by third party, and voluntary scheme need to approve that. For evidence B, the risk assessment could be produced by biomass producer, and the certification body is approving that during the audits. The risk assessments from different voluntary certification schemes are not automatically being recognized, but I believe that's the intention, and they will be looking at the different existing level A risk assessments, and I believe there is the willingness to approve the same risk assessments within different schemes, but this is being like in hands of every voluntary scheme. But I believe the intention is to produce some kind of list of approved level A risk assessment for different countries by all the schemes, and also from like if specific member state will produce such risk assessment, then I believe each voluntary scheme would be looking at it, and there will be willingness to approve this. this risk assessment as level A risk assessment. Origin at the FMU level, in any case, need to be known for the primary feedstock. So you would still need to go back to the forest management unit and link the specific delivery with the specific forest management unit. That's the requirement. And if all indicators in the evidence A or B risk assessments are considered to be low risk, then the entity would just need the signed self-declaration, and there wouldn't be need to go back to the forest and do any additional checks on that. If there are any questions about the risk assessment, then let me know. Otherwise, I will go to the next.
Nothing about risk assessment, but there's a question about the SURE scheme. Is the volume fee applied on each transaction in the supply chain? Do you know that, Andre?
Yeah, I believe the fee is charged based on the biomass traded with the claim, so that would be applicable on each transaction.
If this is not fully correct, we'll of course get input.
We will, yeah.
Yeah, good, thanks.
So coming to the waste and residues. So REDII does not have any specific requirements on waste and residues. Just for the record, the definition of waste is something what could be classified as post-consumer tertiary feedstock. The residue would be something what would be classified as secondary or tertiary feedstock. So something what is not coming directly from the forest.
So, sorry, Andre, I'm jumping back here. There actually came a question now about risk assessment. Is it okay to take that now?
Yeah, please.
Can FSC national risk assessment be used in the case of evidence B?
Not automatically. So it wouldn't be automatically compliant.
Okay, good, thanks.
Then, so yeah, I mean, in case any, like a energy producer or biomass producer would be just working with waste or residues, then as mentioned, there are no specific land use requirements on that in REDII, and only the greenhouse gas saving criteria would apply. But there again, I mentioned it before and I just repeat, SBP do have requirements on this type of biomass as well, so that biomass would need to be at least controlled. But still, there are some requirements coming from REDII and the implementation on this type of feedstock, and that's connected with the proof that that specific biomass is actually really waste or residue. So the biomass producer need to bring some evidence that such biomass was not deliberately modified biomass or intentionally produced biomass. And how to do that? There are 3 ways how to do that, and we would expect that the biomass producer would use all 3 of them. So first, there should be a self-declaration from each supplier declaring that this is really waste or residue, so it's not primary biomass. Then there should be a visual inspection at the reception, so the biomass shall be checked at the reception to make sure that that is really waste or residues. And then there's a requirement to have supplier audits, at least on the sample of the suppliers, to check that that biomass was not intentionally produced. So we would expect that there are these kind of 3 steps implemented as evidence that the biomass is actually waste or residue. And then when it comes to the auditing, so we as a certification body, we would still, whatever voluntary scheme we would use, we would still be obliged to check the suppliers. So we would need to conduct supplier audits. It could be either on-site or remote, depending on the risk. Sure also requires that the producers who deliver significant quantities of biomass are actually inspected. There would need to be the self-declaration from the suppliers, and this is something discussed in the European Commission, but at the moment it's still a requirement that whenever there is like biomass coming from residue or waste, then we as a certification body, we need to conduct first surveillance audit within 6 months from the certification audit. So that's something what goes beyond the current practice. And in case the biomass producer or trader would be dealing with both primary and secondary feedstocks, then the first surveillance audit would need to be conducted within 3 months. As I mentioned, this is something what is being reconsidered. I would personally hope this requirement will be changed, but this is the current situation, and that means there would be a need for an extra audit within the cycle of the 1 year audit, which we usually use. Good. And if there are no more questions, then I will be looking at the first pillar of the REDII, which is the harvesting criteria. And this is mostly relevant for the evidence B risk assessment, right? Because the evidence A, in case you are implementing the REDII, then the evidence, you would just take the risk assessment of the evidence A, so you wouldn't have to deal with this type of details. But in case you would be using the evidence B, and as mentioned, there are currently not many evidence A risk assessments, so that's likely that you would need to look at this. Then you would need to go to this detail. And there are 5 criteria, which is the legality of harvesting, forest regeneration, protection of the biomass, or biomass coming from a protected areas, soil quality, biodiversity, and then a long-term production capacity. And I will be speaking about each of them separately. There is a question if the 3 months requirement mean that the first surveillance audit must be done within 3 and then another within 6 months. No, so that would be either 3 months or 6 months, depending if the economic operator is using only secondary feedstock or secondary biomass from waste and residues, then it would be 6 months. And if the economic operator is using both primary and secondary, then that would be 3 months. Okay, so let's look at the legality of harvesting. So the requirements are kind of on the level of the UTR requirements, which are commonly known. So it's rights to harvest timber, payments for harvest rights, environmental and forest legislation compliance, use of tenure, and trade and custom. So just to be a bit more specific here, so whenever you would be doing the evidence B risk assessment, is not enough to say in the country where we operate, there is a legislation covering all these requirements, and there is no evidence that the requirements would be violated. That would not be enough. That would be more the evidence A risk assessment. But in this case, in the evidence B, it should go to something like okay, we have a contract for every biomass we source. We have a harvesting permit, and we have access to forest management plan, for example. So if that could be the evidence for a low risk, and that's the practice which would be implemented on the sourcing level. So we could imagine that this would be the evidence supplied during the audit to declare the low risk. The forest regeneration criteria. So that's a requirement or indicators saying that the forest after the harvest shall be re-established. Again, we are speaking about the final felling here, so clear cut, selective logging, or some outbreaks. So whenever it is not thinning, that criteria would apply. There is one indicator, and this is exactly the type of indicator where it's not very clear how this can be implemented, and that's that the highly biodiverse forest cannot be converted to lower biodiverse forest. And obviously there is no threshold for that. So that might be something what would need to be, implemented with some kind of creativity, and we would need to find a threshold for this. But that's something what probably goes a little bit beyond the typical risk assessment we would expect to see. Then protection of areas, so that harvesting does not interfere with the nature protection purposes. Well, this covers all kind of protected areas and the biomass sourced from these protected areas. As we understand the requirements, for example, Natura 2000 sites should be included in this. So the economic operator would need to look if there is, if there is such area within the sourcing area, which is set aside for some protection purposes. So we would like, the first step would be to look if within the sourcing area there is such protected area, and if so, the biomass still can be sourced, but then we would need to again see some evidence that the protection is actually assured. Again, the companies who already have, for example, FSC, PFC, or SBP certificate might be ahead of this, because this is already something included within the high conservation value requirements. So that could be again implemented through the existing schemes. And there is a question: is the self-declaration from developed by the BP, or is it specific from the created by REDII, like GGL? So the self-declaration, I believe it varies within the voluntary schemes. I believe SURE has a template for the self-declaration, while in SBP, the certificate holders should develop their own self-declaration fulfilling the requirements from the bridging document or from the REDII module of the SBP scheme. So it depends which voluntary scheme you would be implementing.
There is an additional question here, Andre. What is considered as feedstock in REDII? Only material for production or material for heating as well?
Yeah, good question. So actually REDII is not using the word feedstock, but is using the word biomass, and biomass would be everything coming, like coming through the supply chain. So in the REDII terminology, the feedstock would be actually biomass, and then in that sense it would be everything coming from the forest or from the waste or residue sources.
Thanks.
And then we have the soil quality requirements, which are quite broad. And again, the requirements include the exclusion of harvesting from the poor or vulnerable soils, the preventing of soil erosion. So there should be appropriate machinery used for the harvesting. The removal of stems and roots should be excluded from the biomass sourcing. The sensitive areas, soil areas, shall be identified and mapped, and the extraction of biomass shall not be done from certain sensitive soil types unless there is an explicit permission from the competent authority. So again, looking at so we are talking about the evidence B risk assessment here. So these are the indicators, and the economic operator would need to elaborate on each of these, saying in my sourcing area, either there are not such sensitive soils, we are not accepting any stems or roots, and so on. So would need to present like evidence how this is actually done within the specific operation. And when it comes to biodiversity, the requirements is that the biodiversity shall be maintained, the dead wood shall be left side, and probably one of the, at least from my point of view, one of the most critical requirements is the clear cuts are minimalized, which is not, at least like at the moment, is not super clear how we should be looking at this, because there are like two opinions. Like one opinion is that this is specifically for the large clear cuts, while when you are looking at the like requirements, the word large is not really there. So it's not, I would say this requirement about the clear cuts might be one of the most difficult, like how to go around that, but still there is quite some guidance in the standards, which could probably provide you some kind of idea like how to go around that. And yeah, last indicator from the harvesting criteria is about the long-term productivity or production capacity. So in that sense, again, either if there is no evidence A risk assessment, for which I believe it's quite easy because the data are easier to be collected, because usually there exists some data for the whole country or region. But if you would be left with the option of the evidence B risk assessment, then you would need to be looking, or you would need to have two information or two numbers, which is the annual locked wood, so the volume of the wood locked in the sourcing area or in the FMUs where you are buying from, and then also the net annual increment in that area. And of course, like not for all the specific, FMUs or regions, these data exist, which is probably where it becomes a bit difficult. But whenever these data exist, then it's quite a simple exercise. The economic operator just need to compare the amount of felled timber compare it with the net annual increment. And in case the increment is above the felled timber, then the risk would be considered as low. So with that, I finished the section for the harvesting criteria within the REDII.
There is one question under.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how to categorize forest residues. I mean, forest residues and branches, are they considered residues or intentionally produced biomass?
That would be considered as well primary biomass, let's say. So that would be like a biomass where the harvesting criteria applies.
Right. Good. I think that answers.
And then we have the second pillar, which is the LULUCF criteria. Again, just to mention that still there can be used evidence A or evidence B. Just to be clear, you can have a situation where for the harvesting criteria, so the ones mentioned before, you use evidence B, but for the LULUCF criteria, you use evidence A. So you can have this kind of combination. And I mention it because the evidence B for the LULUCF criteria might be extremely difficult to deliver because this is all about looking at the carbon stocks and sinks for the specific area where you are sourcing from. And I can imagine these data might not exist for all the sourcing areas, or might be difficult to collect. It also would require to have this tracked in time and so on. And therefore, in this case, the evidence A would always be the preferred option and should be much easier. The evidence A would be simply looking at three issues. Does the country where I'm sourcing from has they signed Paris Agreement? Is their national determined contribution submitted to the UN? And does the NDC include also the LULUCF sector? And if the answer for these three questions is yes, then the risk is low. I believe SBP is working on something like a list of these evidence A risk assessment for the LULUCF for the main countries included in their portfolio. So I believe there will be a solution for this quite like at some point of a time, and then this could be used in the scheme as a proof of compliance with REDII. And then we have the third pillar of the REDII, which is the greenhouse gas saving. So this is mostly applicable for the energy producers. It depends when the plant was established. So whenever it was before January 1st, 2021, then the greenhouse gas saving criteria does not apply. If it was after the 1st January 2021, then there would be a requirement of having at least 70% of the greenhouse gas saving compared to the fossil fuel comparator, and that will increase in 2026 to 80%. And it's so there again, there are two options how to go around this requirement. The first one, which is, I would say, very commonly used, and I wouldn't expect that it will change, is to use the default values. So the default values are part of the REDII. You can have a look in the Annex 6, the Part A. There are mentioned the default values for some type of biomass. So there are not all types of biomass, but the most commonly used type of biomass are actually there. So the default values are calculated by the European Commission, and then it's quite easy to use this, and the economic operator does not need to calculate the actual values. But there are some conditions or preconditions for this. So the first one is that there is no land use change. Whenever there would be land use change, the value would change significantly. And then that the distance and type of feedstock or type of biomass is known, because as you can see from this example, you need to use the default value, you need to categorize it properly. So you need to know if it's wood chip, wood pellets, and so on, and you need to know the distance and the value. This is already the greenhouse gas saving value, and that varies depending on the distance, but also on the type of biomass. So so this would be, for example, for wood pellets. So for wood pellets, you would have, again, different greenhouse gas savings values depending on the type, how the pellets how the pellets are produced. So just for your information, the case one is whenever the wood pellets are produced by using natural gas in the boiler. Case two would be using biomass in the boiler, and case three would be using CHP in the boiler. And then if you add the distance, then you would see what is the GHG saving for the particular biomass used in there. What is the measure of no land use change? Is it an yeah, a good question. So there is a question if it's like an absolute or risk-based when it comes to the land use change. Well, I would say that would be part of the evaluation from the previous step. So whenever we would be looking at the harvesting criteria, there is the forest regeneration criteria. So whenever there would be some land use change, that would be shown already in the risk assessment for the harvesting criteria. So we could already identify it there, but actually the biomass, whenever it would come from a land use change, would not be REDII compliant. So I believe this is very much linked to agriculture biomass, actually, not the woody one.
There is also a question, Andre, about short rotation willow and poplar plantations, whether they can be covered by SBP and or FUR certification.
Yes, they could be covered by both schemes. I know SBP is working on a specific system for this type of stocks, but yeah, I believe it would be covered by both schemes, and there is a specific default value for the energy also for the greenhouse gas saving for this type of biomass as well. Yeah, and
and there is one more question: whether REDII sustainability criteria are required for all installations above 20 megawatt, or is limited to the sale of heat and power. or in other words, are industrial biomass dryers above 20 megawatt for internal processes in pellet production required to demonstrate compliance with the sustainability criteria?
Okay, well, I would need to double check that, but my understanding from the top of the head is that that would be by the capacity. So whenever the capacity is above 20 megawatts, then the RED II would apply. But
Okay.
we can double check and come back with the answer.
All right, I'll put that as a clarification point.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, just to mention, so whenever DFAR value would be used, and there are different types of feedstock or biomass being used in the installation, then the calculation or the DFAR value would need to be calculated proportionally. So if there is an energy producer sourcing 30% of residues and 70% of wood chips from forest, then two different DFAR values would need to be used, and then the proportional GHG savings would need to be applied. So that's for the DFAR values, and then just one slide for the actual values. I will not be going into the detail of how to calculate the actual values, as the methodology is rather complex, and yeah, you can find the methodology in the RED II or other guidance documents. But just the practical example here, whenever the installation would like to use the actual value, that's possible, and there are already some tools which facilitate this effort, which can be used. So there is BioGrace 2, there is the drugs calculation tool, or there is ENZO 2. So all these tools can be used, and you just take the data you collect with the biomass, and you apply and you use it in the tool. Of course, it's more work. You need to, if you are buying from different suppliers, you might have different input data, so you would need to plug in different input energy data into the calculators. But the assumption here is that you will get higher GHG savings compared to using the DFAR value, which then shall be the motivation of using the actual values. And how that final step is then done. So the RED II defines the fossil fuel comparators for different energy produced. So there is a comparator for electricity, which is 183 grams CO2 equivalent per megajoule of electricity produced. There is one for heat. There is one for heat with coal substitution, and then there is one for the transport. So the calculation, this example is done using the DFAR value. So whenever there would be, let's say, installation buying wood chips from very far away, then they would take the greenhouse gas DFAR value from the RED II, from the annex, and take that and apply the electricity value of the fossil comparator, and I believe in this case then it would not be RED II compliant, because the value would be higher than the 70% of the fossil of the GHG saving. So, and whenever there would be the actual values used, then from the calculator you would get the actual value instead of this one, and you would apply the actual value instead of the 27. Then that could be like a different value, which should probably lead to a lower value compared to the default value. However, the calculation would be done in the same way. Okay, so that's for the GHG or the greenhouse gas saving part. Again, just to conclude, I would say most of, or like the easiest ways to just use the default values, as this is without any additional effort, and usually even using the default values, you will reach the REDII threshold. So that would be the easier. It's probably just to mention that then within the supply chain, you should get the information if the default or actual values are used. Good. Thank you for the comment. Yeah, the biograce is actually updated for REDII. That's actually true, but I think what is missing is that the European Commission kind of do the check and make it official. So so what has happened is that the biograce 2, which is now the current version, has been updated since, but the European Commission has not done the check of the tool if it's in line with the methodology, and therefore the latest information is that we as a certification body, we still need to check that this tool is in compliance with the REDII. So it's kind of unclear still, or we are waiting for the Commission to give the information that the biograce 2 is now in compliance with the REDII. At least if that's the last time I have checked. And just a few words about the mass balance as well, because that's also something what it's probably new for, at least for those economic operator who been so far working with FSC or PFC. So the system is a bit different. So it's still very similar to the credit system as we know it, but the difference is that the claim period for the waste and residues is 3 months, and for the forest biomass is 12 months. The balance during this period can actually go negative, but it must be positive at the end of the period, and the credit transfer to the next period have to be back up with the physical stock. So I have some example here to explain. This is actually taken from the SBP document, but I think it works very well to explain. So the difference is also that when in, for example, FSC or PFC scheme, whenever the material comes with the claim, then you can pretty much book it on the same credit account, which is not the case here. You still need to distinguish, like have a separate kind of credit account for the type and origin. So as you can see in here, that would mean that there are 3 separate accounts, because there is primary biomass from US, primary from Canada, and secondary from Canada. So whenever the origin or the type of biomass differs, then there must be a separate mass balance table. And then when we take this and do the sales and compare it, then we would conclude, okay, everything what was purchased in that quarter was actually sold, except 50 tons of primary biomass from Canada, and we would need to go and check the physical stock. And this is again a bit challenge on the top of what we have been so far working with, because it means that at the end of the mass balance period, the biomass producer would need to know the stock. So this is not that common that every biomass producer would have such a stock accounting system that in any moment of the time they would know how much biomass is in the stock. But without that information, it would be hardly possible to implement the mass balance system, because if we end up with a balance of 50 tons of primary biomass from Canada, and we need to go to the stock accountant, and if we would find out that there is only 30 tons of stock, then we could transfer only 30 tons of stock to the next mass balance period. So I think that's the challenging piece in this new chain of custody system, which you might experience. And there is, of course, the option to use the physical separation system, which is probably not the ideal, but it can be used. And if that would be the case, then that's quite straightforward. You would need to separate the different biomass depending on the feedstock types and origin. And if you could keep that physically separated, or you have only one type, then this could be used as a physical separation model. Good. So with that, I have.
There is one question, if I may, Andre, going back to the greenhouse gas calculation. There was uncertainty on when to use the typical values. Whether it's required when calculating real values, or can you repeat when to use typical values?
So the typical values are not really used for it's more like a reference value than a value which would be used. So that's something very, very specific, and I wouldn't say that the energy producer would be using this for anything. It's more like a reference value, really.
Right. So either default values or actual.
Or actual values, exactly. Right. Or there is also the possibility, I think I heard somewhere, of using the disaggregated values, and that's a situation. That's a situation where I have it here now, but disaggregated. It's called disaggregated default values, and that means that you use actual values, but for certain piece of the supply chain, you use the disaggregated values. So you can use actual values and disaggregated values for production of the biomass, for example, or for transportation. So maybe show it here. So there are, like in the calculation itself, if you would be using the actual values, then you would end up with something like looking at the land use change emissions, at the emissions from processing, from transportation and distribution, and from the fuel use, right? And then you can say, okay, I will use, there are like no land use change emissions. I will use actual values for transportation and fuel use, but I will use disaggregated default values for the processing. So if you go to the annex of the REDII, you can also find disaggregated default values for only part of the biomass production. So you can also look at this, and you can say, okay, I will have the combination of the actual values and default values. So that's also an option. I just didn't want to be too complicated here, but I hope that's clear that there are like three options, either default value, actual value, or the combination. And in case it's the combination, then it's called disaggregated default value. Good. So if there are no questions now, yeah, I wanted to just sum up or like give you the idea of like what questions you should ask before making the decision, like what to do about the REDII compliance and how to implement the scheme or where to go. So I think the question is like, first question should be asked like, is there national scheme or is there only voluntary scheme? So, you know, like for some countries, there will be only voluntary scheme option. In some countries, you will have also the option of national scheme. So then you can consider which way you would like to go. Then also the question is like, are you using only forestry biomass or agricultural biomass? So if it's forestry and agricultural biomass, then probably SBP is not an option for you. So that would clearly be the SURE would be the ideal option here. Then are you using primary biomass or also waste or residues, or only waste or residues? So again, there are different pros and cons connected with this. When, for example, for secondary, SBP do have some additional requirements. On the other hand, SURE does require to go farther in the supply chain, which is the next point. Like, how long is your supply chain? I mean, I could imagine that for certain end users, it would be much easier option to have SBP certification and cover all the supply chain with that one certificate instead of going with SURE and asking all the suppliers to get certified and the sub-suppliers to get certified. So there are, you know, some pros and cons connected with this as well. So that's an important question for you to ask. Then the evidence A and evidence B. So is there evidence A risk assessment for the areas where you are sourcing from? Probably good to find out like when that can be done. Is there a process of developing some such risk assessment evidence A or not, and so on? If not, then evidence B need to be used, which is much more complex process compared to the evidence A. And the next question would be if the biomass is traded locally or internationally, right? So like if it's like just local, then probably you could consider a national scheme. If not, then probably voluntary scheme would be much better to use. If I don't know, you are a biomass producer willing to have the door open to sell to the markets, also like Denmark or UK, then probably SBP would be much better than SURE, because SURE will not comply with the requirements in this specific market. So that's also probably something to be considered. Right, and with that, I think I have came to the end of the presentation, and yeah, ideally we can spend some time if you have further questions or you would like to, yeah, you can, I don't know if you can unmute yourself, or we can also unmute you if you want
I
to.
would like people to raise the question in the chat primarily. So if you have a question, which is hard to write fully in the chat, we can unmute you, but please make a note in the chat. Currently, I don't think we have any unanswered question, as far as I can see.
I see there is a question. I will read it. Are the criteria how national schemes have to be established? How a level A risk assessment had to be prepared? Can the competent authority recognize REDII biosourcing hub or other risk assessment already conducted? Okay, it's a complex question, but let me try to bring it to different pieces. So there are no criteria on how national schemes should be developed, as far as I know. But if the national scheme would like to be approved by the European Commission, then there are special requirements on how that should be done. So it depends, like if it's national scheme willing to be like European Commission approved or not. Then okay, how the level A risk assessment has to be prepared. So yeah, this is actually one of the unclear topics. So as far as I know, there are no specific requirements how level A risk assessment shall be prepared. There is, and when it comes to the REDII bio, I believe this is something what could be used as the information, but yeah, it's pretty much unclear at like how the REDII bio serves as the evidence. So I think this is still like what will bring some kind of different approaches by different schemes and countries as well. So there is an indication that these REDII bio could be accepted by some schemes, and by some schemes it won't be. The same is for the country level. So some countries might not really accept this. Some countries might accept this. When it comes to the using of existing risk assessments, yeah, I would say that would help, but again, like there is not benchmark done, like how, I don't know, PFC, FSC risk assessments are covering the REDII requirements. I believe there might be some of the requirements going beyond the existing risk assessment, so that's something would need to be evaluated on case by case basis. There again, like I think the ideal is that somebody in the country, either the authorities or some third party, take the lead and develop the level A risk assessment, and then these level A risk assessment can be accepted by the national authorities, by the schemes, and so on. And if that's the case, then they would be the ideal way forward.
Great, Andre. There's then a question, I don't know if you can answer that, but do you have an overview of the status of implementation of REDII across the EU member states? I think that's the hard one.
Yeah, I would love to have that, but unfortunately, like the full picture, I don't have it. I mean, I think somewhere back in October, it was something like 4 countries only had implemented the REDII, so all the others were very much behind.
I think what we can do, Andre, is we can maybe in the follow-up email refer to Bioenergy Europe if they have their latest updates there. I think that's the best we can do at this point, right? Yeah, it's an ongoing process, and also RED3 now being discussed might also interfere with the process. So, but we'll try to answer that in a follow-up email. Then there's a question, is necessary to broaden SPP certificate sphere to be able to offer REDII compliant biomass? I think it's about the SPP scope.
Yeah.
Does it take place by an additional audit by the CB?
Great, very good that somebody asked that, because yeah, I wanted to be more specific on that, and I probably did not manage to do that. So Yes, the answer is currently SBP claim is not REDII compliant claim, and that there is SBP bridging document published, which when implemented, the biomass would or could have also SBP REDII compliant claim. So the answer is yes, additional audit would be needed for that. The biomass producer would need to implement the SBP bridging document. We have done already that audit, so we do have the experience with that, and it worked quite well. I would say it's probably much easier for secondary feedstock than for primary feedstock, and that's especially because of the lack of the evidence A risk assessment. So yeah, that's the situation.
Okay. We have another question. Supplier audits are required for secondary and tertiary feedstock to ? SBP Framework Instruction Document REDII version 1 clause 7 says that this is possible through the documentation review. Is that something you can answer?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, supplier audits are required to prove that the material is really secondary or tertiary. Then it's there again, like it's a bit unclear, like how the supplier audits shall be done in terms of on-site, remote, in terms of the sampling. I believe there is no sampling defined. So there again, like this is something to be also probably evaluated a bit using the risk-based approach. So some feedstocks or suppliers might be more risky, and some feedstocks or suppliers might be less risky. So I think there is certain level of flexibility around the supplier audits there. And again, for example, for just the current experience is that like some of the SBP certificate holders are probably already doing some supplier audits within their supply-based evaluation. So it's just like adding certain question to the supplier audit questionnaire, and that can be done as well. So it depends on the situation, but again, it's something very much specific and shall be evaluated by depending on the type of feedstock and suppliers.
So as I understand, it can actually be both document based and also require on-site depending on the case.
And my understanding was that it shall be on site, but there can be a sample, but I can also double check that if needed.
Okay, great. I don't see sorry.
The remote, the remote option, as far as I know, is for the CBs, not necessarily for the biomass producers. So, but yeah, again, like I will need to double check it.
We'll put that under the follow-up. We have a few questions to follow up on here. Yeah, great. So I don't see any further questions at this point.
Yeah, I see some in this chat box, so I will.
Okay, we have two different chat boxes, obviously. So go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like. So, do recognized certification have to accept each other REDII claim? For example, if I deliver sure REDII certified material to SBP certified customer, does my customer had to accept this delivery in the SBP system? Okay, so the REDII defines that the voluntary scheme need to accept each other. So that's one point. But of course, the schemes are using different platforms which are not compatible. So I would say that there is still some work to make this happen. But if we would be doing the energy producer audit and using one or the other scheme, and the energy producer would show us that 30% of the material came with one claim and 70% with another claim, this would be acceptable, and that all the volume would be considered as RED II compliant. So at the energy producer level, I would say that would be the case. So we would accept both claims. At the biomass producer level, that would be still something to more difficult to do. And there is one important point in here. Sure does not. I mean, while SBP RED II claim shall be sure compliant as well, in fact, because it should follow the same rules defined by the European Commission. SBP requires that the material which is RED II compliant is at the same time SBP controlled or compliant. So in fact, if at the biomass producer level, if the material is delivered with sure claim, that would not be enough to comply or be acceptable in the SBP system. Good. To my knowledge, SBP is working on a new versions of bridging document. Are you aware when the SBP release bridging document? No, I cannot really say when that would be. Like, I don't have the specific date, but you are right. SBP is working on a new bridging document, but I would, as far as I know, the changes won't be any significant. So it's mostly, yeah, it's mostly something to cope with the specific RED II requirements. But I think the bridging document, in fact, in the way how it should be implemented and so on, won't change much. But we maybe have somebody from SBP, so yeah, maybe they might be the right people to write the answer here.
I don't see any comments, but maybe we can also bring that up in the follow-up email. So, Andre,
Yep.
Any more questions on your chat?
No, in my chat, that's just yeah. There is an answer from Roman from SBP that the version 2 of the bridging document is expected in 1 or 2 months.
All right.
So, thank you, Roman, for that.
Excellent. Live updates.
Yeah.
Breaking news. So I think if there are no more questions at this point, I think we should just then say thank you very much for today's update. Thank you, Andre, for sharing a lot of technical information at the end of the week. Thank you for everyone for staying around. I hope this was useful information. If you need further updates from our side or any support, feel free to contact us. We have this website here where you can submit your contact information. You can also indicate which the questions, services, requests you're interested in. So please use this as your main contact to us. Then we will follow up with our local experts, or Andre will follow up to clarify your questions and provide you with whatever support and services you might be interested in. And I don't know, Andre, if you have any closing remarks before we call it a day and move to weekend?
No, I would just like to thank everyone for spending the time on Friday afternoon with us, and I hope it was useful. And if you have questions, you still can reach out to us, and we will be very happy to find the answer for you and help you with that. And thank you very much, and have a great weekend, everyone.
And we will follow up with an email probably later next week with a link to the recording, the presentation, and answers to those questions that we couldn't answer during this webinar. So thank you very much and have a pleasant weekend.
Yes. Bye.